I'm Detective James, and this is the cases the news forgot. I've spent over 30 years on the force looking into the eyes of monsters, but I never expected to find one under my own roof. I'm 58 years old, and as a detective, I've learned that the most dangerous lies aren't told in interrogation rooms. They're whispered in the hallways of your own home. I will never forget the sound of that crying because it wasn't a normal cry. It was a broken, choked moan, the kind of sound a person makes when they're trying not to scream while their soul is being split in two. I had just finished a double shift, the weight of the city's crimes still heavy on my shoulders, when I opened my front door and the silence of my sanctuary was shattered. My wife, Emily, was sitting on the edge of the sofa, hugging herself so tightly her knuckles were white. Her face was as pale as a sheet, and her eyes, they were completely lost, staring at a ghost I couldn't see. When she saw me, she tried to stand, but her legs simply gave out. She slumped back, her lips moving, but no sound came out, just a frantic, silent plea. In that instant, every instinct I'd honed as a detective screamed that something catastrophic had happened. I dropped my briefcase, the thud echoing in the foyer, and knelt in front of her trembling body. We've shared 38 years of marriage. We've survived illnesses, crushing debts, the funerals of our parents, and the chaotic joy of raising children. But in nearly 4 decades, I had never seen her like this. Her hands were ice cold and rigid. Every time she tried to speak, her throat produced a weak, clicking sound, like a bird with a broken wing. I asked her once, then twice, then 3 times what had happened, but the trauma had locked her voice away. She just cried without tears, as if the pain was too deep to even reach her eyes. Then my daughter, Sarah, appeared from the hallway. She was moving fast, her breathing agitated, her hair a messy bird's nest as she gripped her cell phone like a weapon. She looked at me and said hurriedly, "Dad, when I got here, she was already like this. I don't know what happened. I've spent my life listening to people lie for a living." Something in her voice sounded too clean, too rehearsed. It was mechanical, like she was reading from a script she'd been practicing in the car. She explained that she'd just come by for a casual visit and found her mother collapsed in the kitchen. But while she spoke, she refused to meet my gaze. In my line of work, that's the first red flag. It's a small detail, but it's the one that tells you the person in front of you is hiding a body. I helped Emily lie down on the sofa, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders and checking her pulse. It was thready and fast, tachycardia induced by sheer terror. Sarah was a whirlwind of unnecessary motion, moving from one side of the room to the other, correcting things that didn't need fixing. She prepared tea no one wanted, straightened pillows, and talked non-stop about trivial nonsense, her voice a shrill distraction. I watched her in silence, my detective's intuition, an old jagged tool I thought I could leave at the precinct, beginning to wake up in the pit of my stomach. It's a cold feeling, realizing your own flesh and blood is playing a part in a scene she created. Several agonizing minutes passed before Emily managed to utter a few words. Her voice was a mere thread of sound, but it was enough to break my heart. She whispered, "I'm afraid." Just those 3 words. She didn't name a person or a reason, just the raw emotion of fear. I took her face between my hands, forcing her to look at me, and that's when I saw it. A dark, barely visible bruise on her left wrist, clumsily tucked under the sleeve of her wool sweater. Sarah stepped forward immediately, her voice sharp. "Surely she hit herself without realizing it, Dad. Lately, she trips over everything." That excuse hit me like a physical blow. I looked up at my daughter, my eyes narrowing. "Did you touch her?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. Sarah froze for a heartbeat, just a second of genuine shock before she composed herself with practiced defense. "How can you say that, Dad? I would never hurt my mother." The room felt smaller, the air thick with a secret I wasn't supposed to find. Emily began to sob harder, burying her face in the sofa cushions. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse Sarah further, not yet. But inside me, something was splintering, a crack opening up in the foundation of my life that couldn't be repaired. I carried Emily to our bedroom, the weight of her feeling like lead in my arms. I gave her the nerve medicine her doctor had prescribed months ago, staying with her until the trembling stopped and her breathing leveled out into a fitful sleep. When I returned to the living room, Sarah was still there, sitting with a calm that felt entirely too manufactured. I told her to leave, but she insisted on staying just in case. Her persistence made my skin crawl. I waited until she went to the bathroom, and then I moved. I didn't go to the kitchen or the porch. I walked straight to the small utility room where I keep the security monitor. Years ago, after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood, I installed a high-end camera system. I never dreamed I'd be using it to investigate my own child. My hands were shaking as I pulled up the digital logs. I reviewed the morning. Nothing. I checked noon. Peaceful. Then I reached a specific block of time. 38 minutes of absolute digital void. The image was frozen. The clock on the display didn't move. There were no records, no motion triggers, nothing. In all the years I've had this system, that has never happened. Someone had manually bypassed the recording. I advanced the footage past the gap, and the image snapped back to life with brutal clarity. The first thing I saw was Emily on the kitchen floor, curled into a ball, clutching her arm. Then, seconds later, Sarah walked into the frame, fixing her hair and checking her reflection in the microwave door before heading toward the living room. My blood turned to ice. I rewound the clip, searching for the missing half hour, but it was gone, deleted with professional intent. I leaned against the cold wall, a sharp pain blooming in my chest. It wasn't a heart attack, it was the agony of betrayal. My daughter, the girl I had protected from every shadow, was a stranger wearing a mask. I walked back into the living room, my face a mask of my own. Sarah asked if everything was okay, and I looked at her for a long time, seeing the calculated glint in her eyes. "Everything is fine," I lied. "You can go home now. We'll be all right." She watched me with suspicion, trying to read the detective behind the father. But I've spent 30 years hiding my hand from the best criminals in the city. She finally left, and that night, I didn't sleep. I sat by Emily's bed, watching the shadows crawl across the ceiling. Every moan she made in her sleep felt like a knife in my gut. At 3 a.m, her eyes snapped open. She looked at me with a clarity that terrified me. "Do not trust her," she whispered, her voice cracking. I leaned in close, the scent of her lavender soap mixed with the clinical smell of the medicine. "Tell me exactly what happened, Emily." Her lips trembled. "She forced me. She pushed me down. She screamed at me because I wouldn't sign." "Sign what?" I asked, the alarm bells in my head turning into a deafening roar. Suddenly, a soft voice came from the hallway. "Dad, is everything okay?" Emily went instantly mute, her face twisting back into that mask of terror. I squeezed her hand tightly, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Yes, Sarah," I called out. "Everything is fine. Go back to sleep." Sarah's footsteps retreated, but the peace was gone. I looked at Emily, tears streaming down her face, and I made a silent vow. I would pretend I knew nothing. I would play the role of the aging, oblivious father until I had every piece of the truth. Because what happened in those missing 38 minutes wasn't just an assault. It was the beginning of a war. At dawn, the house felt like a tomb, smelling of stale coffee and the lingering scent of fear. I watched the sun rise, knowing that my daughter wasn't just looking for a place to stay, she was looking for a way to take everything we had built. And as a detective, I knew exactly how this had to end. I stayed by Emily's side until she woke again, seeing the dark bruise on her wrist turning an ugly shade of purple. It was a brand of betrayal. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Ashamed," she replied. That word nearly broke me. I told her she had nothing to be ashamed of, but I could see the wall she'd built around herself. I prepared breakfast and in a daze, my mind drifting back to the little girl who used to sit on my lap and ask for stories about the bad guys. I thought I had taught her right from wrong. I thought we had raised a woman of character. She had always been headstrong, always firm in her path, but somewhere along the way, that strength had curdled into something predatory. Years ago, when she asked to move back in after her second divorce, we didn't even think twice. We opened our doors thinking our daughter needed a sanctuary. We didn't realize we were letting a wolf into the sheepfold. Slowly, she had started taking over, changing the furniture, controlling the guest list, telling us it was for our own good because we were getting older. It was a slow, methodical creep of control. And now, as I heard her car pull into the driveway at 10 o'clock sharp, I knew the time for observation was over. I opened the door before she could even knock. She was perfectly composed, a rehearsed smile on her face. "Dad, how's Mom?" "You tell me," I said, my voice as cold as a morgue slab. "You were the one holding her when the cameras went dark." Her smile didn't just fade, it vanished, replaced by a cold, hard stare that confirmed everything I feared. This was no longer just a family matter. This was a crime scene. The silence fell between us like a heavy slab of cold marble. Sarah took a deep breath, and I could see the muscles in her jaw tightening as she fought to control her irritation. She looked at me with that patronizing air she'd adopted lately, the kind you'd use with a child or a stray dog. "Dad," she said, her voice dripping with artificial patience, "Mom is just clumsy. You know how she is. She's always banging into the furniture. She doesn't even realize she's doing it half the time." "I've lived with that woman for 38 years, I told her, and my voice was as steady as a heart monitor. "In nearly 4 decades, I've never seen a mark like that, not once." Sarah held my gaze, and for a fleeting, agonizing second, I saw the ghost of the little girl who used to come to me for a Band-Aid when she scraped her knee. But that girl was buried under layers of something cold and calculated. This woman in front of me knew how to fake, and she was world-class at it. "If you just came home to pick a fight, maybe I should just go," she said, reaching for her designer purse. "Not yet," I responded, and the authority in my voice made her hand stop dead in its tracks. "I want to talk about the papers you had her sign yesterday." She didn't blink. Not once. Her eyes stayed wide, locked onto mine, a classic defensive tell. "What papers?" "Dad, you're clearly stressed. You're imagining things." I didn't let up. "My wife spoke that word last night, Sarah. Half asleep, terrified. Sign." She said it like it was a death sentence. Sarah let out a short, dry laugh that sent a shiver down my spine. "It was a bank document, Dad. Nothing more. Standard procedure for her accounts." "Then why was she crying like her heart was being ripped out?" I pressed. Sarah's expression finally shifted. The mask didn't just slip, it cracked. "Because she's weak," she snapped, the venom finally leaking out. "Because she doesn't understand how the world works anymore. Someone has to take charge of things before everything falls apart." I looked at her, truly looked at her. "Take charge? Or take ownership?" She took a step toward me, her eyes hardening into flint. "Watch your words, Dad." I didn't flinch. "You watch your actions, Sarah. Because I'm watching everything else." The air in the house became unbreathable after that. Sarah prowled the living room like a caged beast, her steps short and nervous. My Emily remained frozen by the bedroom door, caught in a purgatory of fear and guilt. I felt like a stranger in the house I'd paid for with 30 years of blood and overtime. It was as if the walls themselves had changed owners while I was looking the other way. Sarah eventually broke the silence, her tone shifting back to that manipulative softness. "I just want to help you, Dad, but you're making it impossible. Help isn't something you impose with bruises and screams, Sarah, and it's definitely not built on a foundation of lies." She pressed her lips, Together, her rage a physical presence in the room. "You don't understand the danger you're in," she insisted. "If we don't sign soon, you'll lose everything." I stared her down. "Lost to whom?" She didn't answer. She just grabbed her bag and headed for the door. "I'm leaving. I'll be back when you've calmed down." She didn't slam the door. She closed it with a disturbing, surgical care that shook me more than any scream ever could. It was the silence of someone who wasn't finished. As soon as the car pulled away, Emily collapsed into my arms. Her small body was trembling so violently, I thought she might break. "You shouldn't have talked to her like that," she whispered. "Now she'll be worse. You don't know what she's like when we're alone." I took her to the sofa, rubbing her freezing hands. "Tell me," I urged. "Everything, from the beginning." She shook her head, her eyes clouded with tears. "No. If I say it out loud, it becomes real. It's already real, Emily. And as long as you keep it a secret, she has all the power." She closed her eyes, and the truth finally began to spill out in a broken whisper. It had started months ago. First, it was the suggestions, then the shouting, then the blatant threats. Sarah told her I was getting senile, that I wouldn't be able to protect her, that she had to sign these documents to save the house. "I didn't understand what they were," Emily sobbed. "And every time I asked, she'd scream at me. She told me if I told you, you'd get angry and leave me. She told me I'd end up alone in an asylum." My heart didn't just break, it shattered into a million jagged pieces. The oldest weapon in the world. Fear. "When did she hit you, Emily?" I asked, my voice thick with a rage I had to fight to contain. She hesitated, then pointed toward the kitchen. "Yesterday. I refused to sign the power of attorney. I told her I wanted to talk to you first. She pushed me against the table. I fell. She squeezed my wrist until I thought the bone would snap, forcing the pen into my hand. She covered my mouth so no one would hear me scream. The image burned itself into my brain like a brand. I had to stand up just to keep from losing control of my own senses." "And then?" I asked. "Then she started crying," Emily said, looking down at her bruised wrist. "She cried as if I was the one hurting her. She said you'd never believe me because I'm just a confused old woman. And then I heard the door. You were home." I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just greed. This was calculated psychological torture. I waited until Emily finally drifted into an exhausted sleep. Then I went back to the security room. I was no longer a father looking for answers. I was a detective building a case. I reviewed the logs, searching for the digital fingerprints Sarah had left behind. I found an additional user account created weeks ago, a fake name, Admin02. The date of its creation was the exact day Sarah moved back into our house. She'd been planning this takeover from the moment she crossed the threshold, but then I saw something she had missed. I had installed an old secondary camera years ago, a low-res unit tucked into the corner of the back hallway leading to the kitchen. It was off-brand, and because it wasn't part of the main hub, Sarah hadn't seen it in the primary logs. I advanced the footage, my hands slick with sweat. And there it was. The quality was grainy, the angle was awkward, but the truth was undeniable. I saw Emily washing a plate. I saw Sarah enter. She closed the door, her body language radiating a cold, predatory intent. I watched as my wife pleaded, shaking her head, her hands up in defense. I saw Sarah grab her. I saw the shove. I saw my wife hit the edge of the oak table and slide to the floor. I had to cover my own mouth to keep from roaring in agony as I watched my own daughter's fingers grind into the fragile skin of the woman I've loved for my entire adult life. I watched her force the signature. And then, with a chilling efficiency, I saw Sarah wipe her own eyes and put on the performance of a grieving, worried daughter just seconds before I walked through the door. I sat on the floor of that dark room, the blue light of the monitor reflecting off my tears. I didn't cry for the money or the house. I cried for the daughter I thought I had raised, the one who was now dead to me. When I heard the front door open again, I dried my eyes and walked out, my face a mask of iron. Sarah looked at me with a sickening sense of superiority. "Did you two talk?" she asked. "Did she finally come to her senses?" "Yes," I answered, my eyes meeting hers like two sharpened knives. "And did you get what you wanted? Did you get the signature?" She blinked, her irritation returning. "Dad, don't play games with me." "I'm not playing, Sarah," I replied, and the weight of my 30 years on the force was behind every syllable. "But I'll tell you this house is still mine, and as long as I have breath in my lungs, no one, absolutely no one, is going to tear our lives apart." We stood there in the hallway, two strangers in a house full of ghosts, and I knew right then that there was no turning back. The war had begun. After seeing that footage, nothing would ever be the same. I spent the rest of the day in a state of hypervigilance, pretending to be the same oblivious old man while my mind was already 3 steps ahead, setting the trap. Every time Sarah walked past me, every time she opened a drawer or looked at a piece of mail, I saw the predator. I saw the woman who hit her mother. And I knew that the detective in me wouldn't stop until justice was served, no matter what the cost. My hands began to tremble with a cold, focused energy. "Do you know where those papers are now?" I asked. Emily leaned in, her voice a ghost of a whisper. "In her purse. She keeps them with her at all times, Dad. As if she's afraid we'll take them back." The purse. I remembered the way Sarah guarded that leather bag with a frantic, excessive zeal, never leaving it in a room alone. It was her portable vault. Now, everything made sense. "Does anyone else know what's happening here?" I asked. She shook her head. "Only you." "Then you're going to trust me," I said, looking her in the eyes. "Whatever happens next, do not face her alone. Do not answer her provocations. Do not sign a single scrap of paper. I am going to take care of everything." Emily hesitated, the weight of 1,000 threats pressing down on her. Then she looked at me with a firmness I hadn't seen in years. "Okay." That one word was her first act of bravery in a long, dark time. When Sarah returned later that evening, she was carrying a box of fast food, whistling a tune as if the afternoon's confrontation had never happened. She talked about the weather, about trivialities, sitting down to eat in front of us without even asking if we were hungry. I watched her like a hawk. Every movement, every smug smile, she was too sure of herself. "Tomorrow, we're going to the bank," she said suddenly, not looking up from her food. "We need to solve this issue once and for all." Emily lowered her gaze. "I don't feel well, Sarah. Not tomorrow." Sarah slammed her silverware onto the table, the metallic clang echoing like a gunshot. "This cannot wait. Dad isn't up to dealing with these things anymore, and frankly, neither are you." "I can decide for myself," I said, my voice like tempered steel. She looked at me with barely disguised contempt. "It's not about you, Dad. It's about avoiding problems." The problem was created by you, I thought. But I kept my cards close to my chest. That night, while the house breathed in fitful sleep, I went back to the camera room. I copied that 38-minute recording onto 3 separate external drives. I hid one in the lining of my old police jacket, one under the mattress, and the third inside a sealed jar buried deep in the garden. If anything happened to me, the truth had to survive. Then I searched my desk, realizing with a jolt that the original house deeds and bank titles were already gone. She'd already moved them. At dawn, Sarah was already dressed in a sharp business suit. "We're going to the bank. I've already made the appointment." Emily looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. I reached under the table and squeezed her hand. "Then we'll all go," I said. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "You don't need to be there, Dad." "I am the legal owner of this home and the life we've built," I replied. "I believe I have a right to be present." She offered a cold, predatory smile. "As you wish." The drive was a silent duel. Knew the truth, she didn't know I knew. That was my only advantage. When we arrived, Sarah marched in like she owned the building, greeting the manager by name. She'd been laying the groundwork for weeks. We were ushered into a private office, and the employee laid out a thick folder. Total power of attorney, asset administration, and legal representation, the clerk announced. Emily began to shake. I rested my hand on hers. Before anyone signs anything, I said, I want to review every single sheet. Slowly. Sarah's face darkened. Dad, we've discussed this. Not with me, you haven't. And certainly not with the law. I turned those pages one by one. It was a total takeover. It was designed to leave us as ghosts in our own lives, penniless and powerless. When I reached the final page, I looked up. We aren't signing a single word of this. Sarah stood up so fast her chair screeched. You can't do this! Everything depends on this signature. No, I answered, standing to meet her. Everything depends on the truth. Her face paled for a split second, then hardened. You don't know what you're talking about. I know everything, Sarah. For the first time, I saw real fear flicker in my daughter's eyes. It was the look of a criminal who realizes the detective has found the weapon. She tried to recover, putting her mask back on. Dad, you're exaggerating. Mom accepted this months ago. She accepted under extreme duress, I countered, and that invalidates every mark she's made. The bank employee looked between us, sweating. Sir, if there is a conflict, perhaps this is being resolved right now, I interrupted. I looked at Sarah. Tell her the truth. Tell her about the kitchen. Tell her about the bruises. Sarah let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. The truth about what, Dad? The bruises? What kind of insane lie is that? Then, the unthinkable happened. Emily stood up. She didn't tremble this time. She raised her head with a dignity that had been suppressed for far too long. Do not lie anymore, Sarah, she said, her voice cracking but strong. You pushed me. You squeezed my wrist until I cried. You forced me to sign, and I will never, ever do it again. Sarah turned white. Mom, you're confused. Confused, Emily shouted. I was confused when I thought you loved us. Now I know you just wanted to bury us. The bank clerk reached for the phone. This is a serious allegation. If there was violence, I have to report this. Sarah became desperate. No! This is a misunderstanding. My father is senile. He's influencing her. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the memory drive, placing it on the desk like a judge's gavel. Here is exactly what happened in that kitchen, I said. Everything was recorded. Sarah recoiled as if I'd struck her. That doesn't exist. I deleted... She stopped, realized she'd just confessed, and covered her mouth. You deleted the main log, I said. You forgot about the backup in the hallway. Security arrived a moment later. As we were escorted out, Sarah grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Dad, please! This got out of hand! You'll destroy me! I looked at her with a grief so deep it felt like an ocean. It wasn't a mistake, Sarah. It was a choice. You destroyed yourself. I'm just saving your mother. In the parking lot, she collapsed to her knees, wailing, begging us not to ruin her. I only wanted to secure our future, she cried. The future isn't secured by destroying the people who gave you life, I said. Emily looked at her one last time. I raised you to love, Sarah, not to attack. Today you didn't just break the law, you broke my heart. We got into the car and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I saw my daughter standing alone in the vast, empty parking lot, defeated, small, and finally exposed, but the nightmare wasn't over. That night, the phone rang. If you go to the police, Sarah hissed, her voice unrecognizable, I'll tell them you're the one who's abusive. I'll tell them you're out of your mind and you invented that footage. I'll ruin your reputation before you can say a word. Do it, I replied. The truth doesn't break under the weight of a lie. Later that night, I heard a scratching at the back door. I looked through the window and saw Sarah's silhouette. She was trying to break into the tool shed, searching frantically for the documents and the drives. I didn't stop her. I just recorded her with my phone. I watched her realize she was chasing ghosts, and I watched her flee into the night. The next morning, my wife's phone was flooded with a whirlwind of manipulation, insults, pleas, promises, and threats. I took Emily's hand, looking at the evidence piled on my desk. I knew what I had to do. I called my old precinct. I spoke to a lawyer. For the first time in my life, I truly understood. To save the person you love, you have to be willing to face the monster you helped raise. This was no longer just a father's heartbreak. This was a detective's final case, and I wasn't going to lose. The war was no longer silent. It had begun. That day, after my daughter's desperate attempt to breach the patio, the silence of the house was no longer a refuge. It was a territory of constant, exhausting surveillance. Every noise, the settling of the floorboards, a passing car, the vibration of my cell phone, made my heart hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. My wife didn't stop shaking all morning. I feigned calm on the outside, a mask I'd worn for decades in the precinct, but inside, my mind was racing. I knew we were no longer just a family in conflict. We were two elderly people trapped in a high-stakes game where betrayal bore our own last name, and the stakes were our very lives. When Emily finished her breakfast, I helped her to the sofa. I offered her medicine, my own hands steadying hers because she was shaking so much I feared she'd drop the glass. "Will she come again today?" she asked in a whisper that broke my heart. "Maybe," I responded. "But today, Emily, we are no longer defenseless." She didn't ask what I meant. She saw the change in my eyes, and she knew that change was irrevocable. I waited for her to drift into a fitful sleep. Then I went straight to my desk. I took out the memory drive with the recording, connected it to the computer, and played that nightmare scene again. I needed to see it, to burn it into my retinas, because that image was going to be the compass for everything I did from here on out. Seeing it a second time was harder than the first. There was my wife, her back turned. There was my daughter entering with that cold, determined step. I saw the moment she grabbed Emily's arm. I saw the shove. I saw my wife try to protect herself with her fragile hands. I saw the forced signature and the sickening faked crying that followed. Every second felt like a slow stabbing. I didn't turn it off. I needed to record every gesture in my memory. I copied the file onto 2 more drives. One I hid inside the toilet tank in a sealed plastic bag. The other, I tucked inside an old accounting book that hadn't been touched in a decade. The original stayed with me, sewn into the lining of my jacket. I knew Sarah wouldn't stop, and I knew every move she made could become her own sentence if I was just patient enough. That afternoon, she called. "Dad," she said, her voice sounding more docile, more like the daughter I remembered. "I want to talk properly, yet without shouting, without the drama." "You can come," I responded, but only with respect. She let out a fake, airy laugh. "I always respect you, Dad." I hung up. She arrived at sunset, carrying a bag of fruit like a peace offering, pretending a normality still existed between us. Emily turned rigid the moment she saw her. I stepped forward immediately. "Mom is tired. You'll talk to me." Sarah pressed her lips together but nodded. We sat face to face at the kitchen table. For the first time, I looked at her without the filter of fatherly love. I looked at her as I would a suspect in an interrogation room. "Dad," she began, "this all got out of control. But we can fix it. You give me the recording, I destroy those papers, and we pretend nothing happened." I leaned forward. "And who erases your mother's fear, Sarah?" She lowered her gaze, playing for sympathy. It was a moment of anger. Nothing more. "No," I responded. "It was violence. And violence isn't a mistake. It's a decision." She stood up abruptly, the mask slipping. "You don't understand anything. I was protecting what's ours." I didn't flinch. "The house isn't yours. The money isn't yours. And your mother is not your possession." Hate returned to her eyes, pure and unfiltered. Sooner or later, you'll lose everything, she spat. You're old, Dad. The world isn't for you anymore. I felt a deep, hollow pain, not at the insult, but at the realization that she had truly felt this way for a long time. If that's the world you've built, I told her, I'd rather stay out of it. She stepped closer, her voice a dangerous whisper. What are you going to do? Report me? Put me in jail? I looked her in the eye. I'm going to do justice, Sarah, even if it breaks my soul. She held my gaze for a moment, then turned and vanished into the night. Emily was crying when I closed the door. Is she going to hurt us? She asked. I hugged her tight. She can't anymore. But I knew she still had resources, lies, contacts, and a desperate cornered rage. The next day, I got a notification from the bank. She was trying to schedule another appointment using Emily's stolen data. She wasn't slowing down. She was escalating. I realized then that waiting wasn't enough. I had to lead her to a place where she would expose herself completely. I called my younger brother. We hadn't spoken about deep family matters in years, but blood is blood. I need you to come home, I told him, and bring a trusted lawyer. What happened? He asked, sounding alarmed. Our daughter crossed a line that has no return. That afternoon, while I waited, I went back to the camera room. I looked for digital traces and found something that froze my blood. There were several recent external connections, unknown IP addresses. Sarah wasn't alone. She had built something bigger, something dirty, and now it was starting to surface. When my brother arrived with the lawyer, I told them everything. I showed the recording. My brother put his hands to his face, watching his niece strike his sister-in-law. This is a clear criminal case, the lawyer said. My wife listened from the sofa, weeping. What will happen to her? She asked with that nagging mother's guilt. The lawyer was blunt. That depends on what she does next. But this is no longer just a family fight. It's a crime. The next day dawned gray and heavy. Emily didn't want to get out of bed, her body exhausted from weeks of terror. I sat with her, whispering that none of this was her fault. At 10 a.m., I met my brother and the lawyer at the library. We have proof of aggression, coercion, and document forgery, the lawyer said. But to make this ironclad, we need her to act again. We need her to believe she still has a chance to win. It was a gamble. I'll talk to her, I said. I'll make her think I'm ready to negotiate. I called her that afternoon, making my voice sound tired, defeated. Daughter, we need to talk. I'm tired. Your mother is sick. I don't have the strength to fight you anymore. There was a pause. I could hear her gears turning. And what do you propose? She asked. Come tomorrow. No shouting. Just you and me. She accepted, her voice ringing with a victory she hadn't earned. The plan was in motion. I prepared the house with hidden recorders, one on the shelf, one under the cushion. I activated the secondary camera. At 4:08 p.m., she arrived, walking with a victor's stride. She entered as if she already owned the place. Can we fix this, Dad? She asked with that fake smile. Sit down, I said. She demanded I destroy the recording in exchange for her taking care of us. You'll live peacefully without worries, she promised. Or without rights? I countered. She narrowed her eyes. Dad, you're an old man. I don't want you to end up in a bed forgotten. It sounded like a threat. I told her I could take her to prison, but she just laughed. You don't have the courage? You're wrong, I said. I was just waiting for one more piece of proof. She frowned. What proof? That you yourself would admit to what you did. She went quiet, then leaned in. I did what I had to do. You two couldn't handle it. Someone had to take control. Control isn't taken with violence, I said. She looked at me coldly. The weak always lose, Dad. I wasn't willing to lose. Her frankness was chilling. It was the confession I needed. And I'm the weak one, I asked. You and Mom, she responded without hesitation. Both of you. I took a deep breath. Then let me ask you one last thing. If I hadn't found that recording, how far would you have gone? She didn't even hesitate. As far as necessary? That was it. No more doubts, no more remorse. The conversation is over, I said, standing up. She looked at me with a twisted smile. Are you going to report me now? No, Sarah, I said. You just reported yourself. She looked at me, her mouth hanging open, the realization moving across her face like a slow-motion train wreck. I slowly pulled the memory drive from my jacket pocket and held it up between us. Every word, Sarah. Every threat. Every admission of what you did in that kitchen. It's all recorded. Her face didn't just pale, it decomposed. The arrogance vanished, replaced by a frantic, animalistic panic. She lunged toward me, but I didn't move an inch. That's illegal, she shrieked. You can't record me in my own house. It's my house, I reminded her, my voice like a slab of granite. And what's illegal is what you did to your mother. She spun around, sprinting toward the door, but I'd spent 30 years anticipating the moves of runners. I was already prepared. Before her hand could even touch the brass knob, the back door burst open. My lawyer had coordinated with the precinct perfectly. 2 officers, men I'd worked with, men who knew my reputation, crossed the threshold in seconds. Sarah screamed, a high, piercing sound of a cornered predator. She tried to duck past them, but they caught her, pinning her arms behind her back. Sarah Williams, you're under arrest for domestic violence, coercion, document forgery, and attempted asset stripping, one of them announced, his voice booming in the small room. She twisted in their grip, her eyes wild, darting from the handcuffs to me. Dad! She screamed, her voice cracking with a mixture of hate and a sudden, sickening plea for mercy. You can't do this to me. I'm your daughter. I looked at her one last time, feeling a part of my heart turn to ash. You stopped being my daughter the moment you laid a hand on your mother. They dragged her out, her screams echoing down the driveway until the patrol car door slammed shut. I let myself fall into the kitchen chair, my legs finally giving out. The worst was over. But I knew, deep in my gut, that a different kind of pain was just beginning. The sound of the sirens faded into the distance, leaving a silence so heavy it made my ears ache. Emily was still on the sofa, motionless, her eyes fixed on the door as if she expected the nightmare to walk back in. I walked over and knelt in front of her, my soul feeling leaden with exhaustion. She's gone, Emily. She can't touch you ever again. It took her a long time to blink, to move, to realize that the air in the room was finally hers to breathe. She looked at me and whispered, Really? She's really gone? Then something happened that I will never forget. My wife, the woman who had spent months shrinking into the shadows, broke down. It wasn't just crying. It was a soul-cleansing wail, a scream of survival that dragged every ounce of fear and humiliation out of her body. I held her, feeling her vibrate against me, knowing this was the sound of a woman returning from the dead. I'm still afraid, she sobbed into my chest. Even though she's gone, the fear is still here. Fear doesn't leave all at once, I told her, my own voice thick. But we have something stronger than fear now. We have the truth. Neither of us slept that night. At 2 a.m., the house felt like a hollow shell of its former self. We sat at the same kitchen table where we'd raised her, where we'd shared thousands of meals, and we stared at the wood as if it were a crime scene. I never thought a daughter could do that, Emily murmured. I carried her for 9 months. I squeezed her hand. She chose the dark path, Emily. We gave her the map, but she's the one who took the turn. By dawn, my brother and the lawyer arrived with the grim details. The fraud was deeper than we thought. Sarah hadn't just been after the house. She'd been systematically draining small amounts from our retirement accounts for months, using forged signatures to cover her tracks. This is systematic abuse, the lawyer said, his face grim. It's not just a family spat. It's a felony." The word prison hit Emily like a physical blow. She lowered her head, and that mother's instinct still trying to find a way to shield the child who had struck her. But my brother was firm. "If we don't stop this now, she'll finish what she started. This has to end." The news traveled through the neighborhood like a wildfire. The phone didn't stop ringing. Some people genuinely cared. Others just wanted to feast on the tragedy of the Williams family. We didn't answer. I didn't want our pain to be a spectator sport. Then, late in the afternoon, the call I'd been dreading came through. It was from the county lockup. "Dad," her voice said. It was stripped of the arrogance, sounding small and hollow. "They're letting me make one call. I never wanted it to go this far." "It went this far because you pushed it," I said, my chest tightening. "Every single day you chose to hurt us." There was a silence on the other end, a long, jagged pause. "Mom always protected me," she whispered. "She always forgave me for everything, so I got used to it. I thought she would just forgive this, too." And when she finally stood up for herself, "You hit her," I said. I heard her sob on the other end. "I didn't want to hurt her." Damage isn't always done with intention, Sarah. Sometimes it's done out of pure, naked selfishness. You thought you were above the rules because we loved you. "Do you hate me?" she asked. The question pierced me more than any of her threats. "No," I said, my voice failing me. "But I can't protect you from yourself anymore. You have to face what you've done." She hung up, and I stared at the dead phone for a long time. Emily was watching me from the doorway. "Was it her?" she asked. I nodded. She said she didn't mean for it to go this far. Emily closed her eyes. "I didn't want this either," she whispered. "But here we are." 2 days later, we were called to the courthouse for the preliminary hearing. The building felt cold, sterile, a place where emotions are dissected like specimens. When they brought Sarah in, handcuffed and wearing a jumpsuit that made her look small and fragile, something inside me broke all over again. She wasn't the monster from the kitchen anymore. She was a broken woman facing the wreckage of her own life. We locked eyes for a second, but she was the first to look away. The hearing was brutal. Seeing the kitchen recording played on a giant screen in a room full of strangers was the most humiliating moment of my life. I watched the judges and the bailiffs look away, unable to stomach the sight of a daughter striking her elderly mother. Sarah sobbed quietly into her hands. When the judge slammed the gavel down, decreeing pre-trial detention, the sound echoed like a funeral bell. It wasn't a victory. It was a tragedy. Leaving the courthouse, Emily stopped on the sidewalk and took a deep, shaky breath of the cold air. "She can't touch us," she said. And for the first time in a year, I saw a glimmer of the woman I married. I can finally breathe. I hugged her tight, but as a detective, I knew the scars would remain. We had saved our home, but we had lost our child. We had to learn how to live in the wreckage, knowing that sometimes the ultimate act of love is letting justice take the person you tried so hard to save. My wife woke up in the middle of the night, bolt upright and gasping for air. She was convinced she'd heard Sarah's voice calling out from the hallway. I was out of bed in a heartbeat. I paced through every room, flipping on every light, checking the locks and the shadows. The house was a tomb, perfectly silent, but fear is a tenant that doesn't move out just because you've served an eviction notice. When trauma has lived in your bones for months, it doesn't care about a police report. The following days were a blur of unwanted faces. Brothers, cousins, and old acquaintances we hadn't spoken to in years suddenly found the time to drop by. As a detective, I've always been good at reading people, and I quickly learned to tell the difference between those who came with an open heart and those who were just there to scavenge for details to tell at their next dinner party. I dismissed the gossip seekers with a cold, professional politeness. We had already been stripped bare. I wasn't going to let them turn our tragedy into a spectator sport. On the third day, the lawyer called with a report that felt like a series of body blows. The investigation wasn't just about a kitchen scuffle anymore. They'd uncovered a digital trail of attempted bank transfers, loan applications forged in our names, and a string of secret meetings between my daughter and a corrupt bank manager. This wasn't an impulsive outburst, James, the lawyer told me, his voice grim. She didn't just snap. She'd been weaving this web for months. This was a calculated execution of a plan. I watched Emily's face as I relayed the news. Her lips were pressed into a thin, white line. It was one thing to process a moment of violence, but it was another entirely to realize your child had been sitting across the dinner table from you, smiling, while she methodically plotted to dismantle your life. "And now?" she asked, her voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. "Now the formal process begins," the lawyer explained. "Hearings, witnesses, psychological evaluations. You'll have to give a formal statement." Emily shuddered, her eyes darting to the door. I don't want to see her again. I can't." I squeezed her hand. "The law protects you now, Emily. You won't have to look at her if you don't want to." That night, the silence of our dinner was broken by Emily's sudden, jagged sobbing. "I still see her as a little girl," she choked out. "I see her with that red ribbon in her hair, running through the yard, laughing. And then I wake up, I look at my wrist, and I remember. My heart. I just can't handle the distance between those two versions of her." I took her face in my hands, looking into the eyes of the woman I had loved for a lifetime. "Love doesn't disappear because a judge signs a paper," I told her. "But just because we love her doesn't mean we have to let her destroy us. You created a daughter, Emily. What she chose to become after that was her decision, not yours." A few days later, the phone rang again from the county jail. I stared at the caller ID for a long time before I picked up. "Dad?" The voice was hollow, stripped of the fire and the arrogance. I barely recognized it. "How is Mom?" "She's alive, Sarah," I said, my voice like cold iron. And that's saying a lot. I heard a sob on the other end. "I never wanted to kill her, Dad. You have to believe me. But you broke her, Sarah. You broke her spirit, her trust, her sense of safety. Those wounds don't always heal with time." There was a long silence, filled only by the static of the line. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "It's dark here. I don't belong in a place like this." "You didn't belong in the place you were either," I replied, a wave of profound sadness washing over me. "You walked away from your home long before the police took you there." She asked if her mother would testify against her. I looked at Emily, who was standing in the doorway, listening to every word, but saying nothing. "Your mother will tell the truth," I said. "And for the first time in your life, Sarah, the truth is not a tool you can use to get what you want." The line went dead on a long, trailing sob. When the day for our formal declaration arrived, the atmosphere in the courthouse was suffocating. We were led into a small, sober room to meet the judge. Emily was pale, but as she began to speak, something shifted. Her voice, which had been a whisper for months, grew steady. She detailed every blow, every hissed threat, every time a pen was forced into her hand. She spoke about the humiliation of being a prisoner in her own kitchen. When she finished, the judge sat in silence for a long time. "What you've endured is a profound betrayal," the judge said softly. "I assure you, it will be met with the full weight of the law." Emily didn't cry from fear this time. She cried because, for the first time in a year, she felt like she had a voice again. She had reclaimed her dignity. As we left the courthouse, a few local reporters were waiting. I stepped in front of Emily, shielding her from the flashing lights. "My wife needs peace, not your cameras," I barked, the old detective in me coming out in full force. "Respect our privacy." In the days that followed, the fallout continued. Some family members actually had the nerve to defend Sarah, claiming we were exaggerating or that she was just under too much pressure. But the majority, the neighbors who had seen Emily shrinking away, the friends who had suspected something was wrong, stood by us like a fortress. My brother stayed to help us untangle the financial mess Sarah had left behind, canceling forged documents and securing our accounts. The house finally started to feel like a home again. The air felt lighter. But then, one Tuesday afternoon, a thick envelope arrived from the courthouse with a red, urgent stamp on it. Emily looked at me, her face losing its color. "Is it over?" she asked. I opened the letter, my eyes scanning the legal jargon. It was the formal indictment. The state wasn't just going after her for the assault. They were bringing a dozen counts of felony fraud. But there was something else inside, a handwritten note from the public defender. Sarah wanted a face-to-face meeting before the trial began. She was claiming she had information we needed to hear. My detective's gut told me this was one last play, one final manipulation. But as I looked at Emily, I realized we couldn't move forward until we closed the door on the past once and for all. "Open it," Emily said, her voice barely audible. I did it with the steady hands of a man who had spent a lifetime handling evidence, but my heart was doing a slow, painful roll in my chest. It was a formal request for expanded testimony. Our daughter wasn't just pleading not guilty. She was going on the offensive. She was alleging that Emily was psychologically altered and that I had manipulated her into a false accusation to settle old, imagined grudges. Emily brought her hand to her chest, her face turning a ghostly gray. "You see," she whispered, "she still wants to destroy us. Even from behind bars, she's trying to tear us apart." I hugged her so tightly I could feel her heart racing against mine. "She can't, Emily. Lies only work in the dark. Now the truth is speaking, and the truth doesn't need to shout to be heard." The trial began weeks later, and it felt like walking through a waking nightmare. We gave our statements. The experts spoke in clinical tones about cognitive health and the mechanics of coercion. The kitchen recording was played over and over, a loop of our family's destruction projected on a courtroom wall. Sarah sat at the defense table, avoiding our eyes. When she did look at me, it was a gaze filled with a sharp, cold reproach, as if I were the one who had betrayed her. I held that look without blinking. I'd stared down killers in interrogation rooms. My own daughter could no longer make me flinch. When the provisional resolution arrived, it was a heavy blow for her. Prolonged pretrial detention due to flight risk and a total freeze on every document she'd managed to fraudulently sign. Emily collapsed onto the sofa when the lawyer told us. "She can't take anything from us anymore," she murmured. "She never could, Emily," I responded. "She only convinced herself she did." That night, we ate in a silence that felt different. It wasn't the silence of fear that had haunted us for months. It was a silence of mourning, the quiet that follows a great storm. Before sleep, Emily took my hand. "If I were born again," she told me, "I'd do almost everything differently. Except one thing." "What's that?" I asked. "Choosing you," she said, her eyes moistening. Even with our family tree splintered by betrayal, the bond between us remained. That was our only victory. The day of the final sentencing dawned under a gray, indecisive sky. Emily got up early, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were preparing for a funeral. I watched her from the bedroom door, trying to hide the storm in my own gut. We had waited for this moment for months, but being close to the end doesn't make the weight any lighter. It just makes the pressure more concentrated. We prepared in near silence. I served her coffee. She barely touched it. As we left the house, she looked back at the hallway one last time, as if she feared she wouldn't recognize herself when she returned. The courthouse was packed, the air thick with the muffled, whispers of the curious and the judgmental. When we entered the room, the pounding in my chest was so loud, I feared it would distract the court. Sarah was already there, dressed in sober, dark clothes, her hair tied back tight. She looked pale and small, nothing like the woman who had screamed and shoved her mother, but I knew her masks. I avoided looking at her, but Emily couldn't help it. When their eyes met, I felt Emily shudder. I gripped her shoulder, steadying her. She needed to be here, not as a victim, but as the woman who had reclaimed her life. The judge's voice was like a hammer, reading the charges: domestic violence, coercion, forgery, attempted asset stripping. Then, Sarah was given the floor. She stood with trembling hands, her voice a thin whisper. She spoke of stress, of money problems, of feeling burdened by our aging. She said she never meant to hurt anyone, that it just got out of hand. I listened to her lies and felt a tired, hollow ache. When it was Emily's turn, time seemed to stop. She walked to the stand, and I felt her hand slip from mine. I was terrified she'd break, but she didn't. She raised her head and spoke with a clarity that silenced the room. She didn't decorate the truth. She told the story of the first push, the last threat, and the terror of being a prisoner in her own home. The truth, when it's finally spoken aloud, weighs more than any lie. I followed her, testifying about the digital evidence, the missing 38 minutes, and the sight of my own daughter's fingers bruising the woman I loved. The judge called for a recess. The silence in that room was brutal. You could hear the nervous breathing of the spectators. Emily squeezed a small rosary until her knuckles were white. When the judge returned, we stood. I felt a strange vertigo, a rejection of the moment. Then the words came. Guilty. Guilty on all counts. The sentence included effective prison time and the immediate annulment of every fraudulent document. Emily let out a soft moan, and I held her waist to keep her upright. Sarah didn't scream this time. She cried with a deep, hollow desperation. For the first time, her tears weren't a weapon. They were the sound of defeat. As they led her away, she looked at me one last time. There was no hate left, just a mute, terrible question I didn't want to answer. The heavy door closed behind her with a thud that echoed in my bones. Outside on the sidewalk, Emily took a long, deep breath of the city air. "Is it over?" she whispered. "Yes," I said. "It's over." But it wasn't a happy ending. It was a necessary one. And sometimes, that's all life gives you. The days that followed were strange, filled with a calm that felt like an absence. Sarah's bedroom door remained shut until one afternoon, Emily asked me to open it with her. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. The bed made, the clothes in the closet, the trinkets on the shelf. It was a shrine to someone who no longer belonged to us. Emily sat on the edge of the bed and wept in silence. I stood in the doorway, realizing there's no manual for how to close your heart to your own child. But slowly, we began to rebuild. Emily started therapy. She began to sleep without waking up screaming. We started to remember who we were before the wolf moved into our house. The days began to stretch out, and slowly, the heavy, suffocating air of the last year began to clear. I watched Emily from the kitchen window as she started walking through the garden again. At first, her steps were hesitant, but soon she was watering the plants and talking to herself without looking over her shoulder. I watched her with a mixture of pure joy and a lingering hollow sadness. I saw her being reborn right before my eyes, yet I couldn't help but see the shadow of our daughter in the way Emily tilted her head or tucked a stray hair behind her ear. One afternoon, while we were sitting on the porch drinking coffee under the warmth of the sun, Emily looked at me, her eyes clear for the first time in years. "James," she said softly, "if you hadn't walked through that door when you did, I don't think I'd be sitting here today." I reached across the small table and squeezed her hand, feeling the strength returning to her fingers. "And if you hadn't found the courage to whisper those words to me," I told her, "I would still be blind. I would have let the wolf live in our house until there was nothing left of us. We sat in silence then, just two people who had survived the greatest tragedy of our lives, a tragedy written by someone we loved with every fiber of our being. I realized then that true love isn't naive. It isn't a blank check. To love someone doesn't mean you allow them to destroy you. Sometimes, to truly save the person you love, you have to protect them from the very person who shares their blood, even if that means standing in a courtroom and speaking a truth that shatters your family tree. Emily gave me a weak, tired smile. Now, James, I just want to live in peace. And you will have it, I promised her. But in my heart, I knew we weren't the same people we were before. We could never go back to that blissful, ignorant version of ourselves. The price of seeing the truth was astronomical. We lost a daughter. We lost the illusion of the perfect family we thought we had built. We lost the daughter we thought we knew. But we didn't lose the things that actually mattered: our lives, our dignity, and the small light we still had left to share. In that garden where we had once laughed as a family of three, we finally understood that when love stops being blind, it hurts like hell. But it also sets you free. Months have passed since the gavel fell in that courthouse. Today, the house smells like home again. Fresh coffee in the mornings and the scent of toasted bread. Emily walks with her head held high, her shoulders back. She sleeps through the night without the night terrors. And sometimes, I even hear her humming old songs while she's out among her roses. I watch her, and I don't take a single second for granted. It hasn't been an easy road. No wound that bears the name of your own child heals quickly, and some scars never fade. There are days when I find her staring out the window, her eyes glazed and lost, and I know exactly who she's thinking about. In those moments, I don't try to fix it with hollow words. I just walk over and take her hand. We've learned that some pains aren't cured by talking. They're survived by simply being there for one another. Our daughter is serving her sentence now. We haven't visited and we haven't spoken. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I wonder if I'll ever be able to look at her photo without feeling a knife twist in my chest. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if she'll ever truly understand the depth of the damage she did. All I know is that I did what I had to do, as a husband, as a man, and as a father who refused to let evil win. Today, we live with less fear and more truth. We lost something irrecoverable, yes, but we saved our souls. If my story reached you today, I want you to remember one thing. It is never, ever too late to say enough. It is never too late to protect the people who truly matter. And it is never too late to face a painful truth, no matter how much it burns. I'm Detective James, and this was my story. If this journey touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and join our community. Your support gives us the strength to keep sharing these real, raw stories of the human heart. Like the video and leave a comment below. Tell me what you would have done in my place, and let me know which city you're watching from. I read every single message. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening to an old man's truth. And most importantly, thank you for not looking the other way.